I hope you get something out of this, because a lot of what I say today can apply to other disciplines, not just necessarily masonry. We want to see quality construction in the field, and hopefully that's what we end up with. And by playing partners all the way from the designer down to the contractor, I think it works much, much better than just trying to put the plans out there and not communicating. As you can see, the title today is Quality Assurance and Special Inspection Requirements for Masonry. It will be kind of focused on masonry, but as I said, some of the stuff can apply to other disciplines as well. We have learning objectives today, of course, and what is our first learning objective is to understand the history behind masonry quality assurance. It didn't just pop up yesterday. It's been coming along for a long time. Longer than most of us have been alive. And I'll go back and share with you a little bit of the history, because when we know the history, it helps to understand why we are here today and where we are going in the future. We also want to know the code requirements for minimum quality assurance. If we know what the code requirements are, we can always try to beat that, do better than, whether we're the designer or the contractor. And how do we get to beat the minimum quality assurance? Well, we have to know what they are, and if we want to specify something above and beyond what the code requires, we're certainly entitled to do that. And then we want to be aware of the critical components of structural masonry. Structural masonry has some hidden components, I call them. The reinforcement and the grouting is going to be hidden, and that's what is the basis of your structural integrity of the system. If it's done right, it can last for generations, even more than 100 years. And we also want to have the ability to develop an effective quality assurance program. And that is actually built into the code. I'll show you where it is and how we can make use of it to start from ground zero without reinventing the wheel every time. The outline today, I'm going to show you some code requirements, the history and where we are today, and how to develop a quality assurance program, what we are obliged to do, and then in the third part, what to look for in the field. There's some critical components of masonry, and I hate to say this, but there's some other elements of masonry that are not so critical. That doesn't mean they're not critical, but they're not as critical as what I call the critical components of masonry. And in this presentation today, you get a bonus. That is Quality Assurance Simplified, at least for masonry, to show you how to take what's in the code, integrate it into the project documents for your benefit. And that's really a good thing. We've worked hard in the code arena to make it available, and now it is available, and we can certainly use it. When we look at the history, the Uniform Building Code, once upon a time, the inspection requirements started about 75 years ago in 1943. And then it morphed into the International Building Code, much in the form as it was at the turn of the century, 2000. And there were some critical components of reinforcement and grouting and the connections. Those are the super critical components, I might say. And then we have the right specification. I'm going to show you some examples of specifications that were cut and paste from job to job, and they morphed into something which was really sending the wrong message to the field. So show you how to get the right specification, and I think that will help tremendously. And also, we do have a conclusion moving forward. What are the code requirements here? Well, we'll look at the history of the Uniform Building Code, where it all began in 1943. This is the code language from the Uniform Building Code. As you can see, masonry had the 50% penalty, you might say. It started actually in reverse. It said on masonry, when the design is based on unit stress in excess of 50% of those allowed in Chapter 24. And that is when you would have to inspect the masonry. So if you were not inspecting the masonry, you had to penalize your stresses by 50%. Ultimately, it got into the correct language in the code, but this is where it all started, and it was just an absolute arbitrary number. It was just somebody with their thumb, put it in the air, and they said 50% sounds good. Let's just cut it in half, and that's where the 50% stress penalty came. Now, also, if you look at the code where it all began in 1943, it had a paragraph on the registered inspector required. And if you read through that paragraph, if I was the building official and my brother-in-law was unemployed, I could deem that person to be qualified to be an inspector. We didn't have the special inspection program, the exam that is administered by the International Code Council today, to make sure that those inspectors are actually qualified. And when we talk about masonry inspection, we have a couple of terms that one of them is kind of a mystery, and it always has been. That is periodic inspection. What does periodic mean with respect to inspecting the masonry work? In other words, how much does periodic represent? Is it 5%, 25%, 50, 75, 90%? The code has been absolutely silent on this. The building officials have dodged that, and rightfully so, for the 75 years. And finally, some pressure a couple of code cycles ago was put on the masonry standard to try to quantify that. And we put something in the code, which I'll show later on in the presentation in the commentary language, which may help. But we, at the masonry development process, we're sidestepping the question too.